And it's 48 hours until game day. It's time to talk about the Tennessee Volunteers. We're going to do that right here on the Morning Pit. It's Thursday, September 8th, 2022. Glad you could tune in for the Morning Pit. You know what this is. We do it every day, Monday through Friday. Release a new video on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And you're sitting there saying, oh no, Chris, I don't want to miss any of the Morning Pit videos. What am I going to do? I forget sometimes to check in, or maybe I don't follow you on Twitter, or maybe I'm not checking the message boards. I hope I don't miss your video. Any suggestions on how I can make sure I catch up on all the Morning Pit episodes whenever they come out? My friend, you hit that subscribe button right there, and you will always know when we release a new Morning Pit video every morning, Monday through Friday. You'll also know when we go live for our weekly Panther Lair show, like we did last night at 8:30, or as we go live for our post-game shows, which we'll do after the game on Saturday, a few hours after the game, probably a couple hours after the game, depends on what time I get out of Acrisure Stadium and get back to the Panther Lair offices and grab a cold one, for better or for worse. But you'll get notifications. So make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like this video, subscribe to the channel. That's a big help to us. And it'll be a help to you because you'll never miss any of our Pit video content at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Speaking of the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, recruiting, we have it all for you at Panther-Lair.com, and message boards where you can interact with hundreds and thousands of your closest Pitt fan friends. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. I always say we produce the content, you consume it and digest it and discuss it with other Pitt fans on the message boards. It's the best online Pitt fan community that you're going to find. Panther-Lair.com. Of course, we're part of the Rivals.com network, and I'm excited today because we're going to have a guest from the Rivals network, Tyler Mansfield. He covers Tennessee for VolReport.com. That's the Tennessee site on the Rivals.com network. Tyler does a great job there, and we're going to welcome him in a few minutes to give an inside look at Pitt's opponent coming up on Saturday in what really is a huge game. You know, we were having this discussion on the message boards I don't know, I guess yesterday. There was a thread on the message boards. I got involved in it. It's a discussion about what this game really means and whether it really is a big game or if it's not that important or if it's meaningless. And the reality is, whether you're on the side that says this game is huge, one of the biggest games of the season, or you're on the side that says it's not that big a deal, that, you know, it's not an ACC game, it's not going to affect their standing in the Coastal or in the conference. The reality is you're both right. You know, you're both right. And you can really kind of look at it both ways. I think you can say both things. You can say this is an absolutely huge game. Winning it would do a whole bunch for Pitt's momentum, keeping the momentum up, for perception nationally, and firmly it'll give Pitt a chance to be firmly in the conversation for the college football playoffs going forward. Whereas losing this game knocks them down quite a few pegs, depending on how a loss might go. They might get knocked out of the top 25 altogether. You go from 17 to unranked, potentially. You know, I mean, if it's a close loss, maybe you only drop into the 20s, but you drop. There's no question about that. And so there's a lot riding on it from that perspective. And when this team was talking about big overall goals, talking about goals for this season, I mean, beating Tennessee is absolutely a part of what you have to accomplish if you want to reach those goals. If you want to be on the national stage, you want to be in the conversation for the college football playoffs, you have to win this game. You know, it's almost a non-negotiable. Not entirely, but almost. Now, on the flip side, if you want to turn around and say, all right, I get all that, but the reality is if they lose this game, they still have a whole lot of their goals that they can accomplish. You know, that 10-win season that we've talked about is still very much in reach. You know, winning the Coastal Division is still very much in reach. Returning to the ACC championship game, still very much in reach. Repeating as ACC champs, very much in reach. These are all very achievable goals regardless of the outcome of Saturday's game against Tennessee. And if you want to say that, you're right too. As a matter of fact, you could say both if you're so inclined. And you could really, I mean, you could look around at some of the coverage of Utah's loss at Florida that dropped the Utes, obviously, you know, or from a top 10 team down, handful of spots and obviously boosted Florida considerably, but there's still talk about how Florida or how Utah could work their way back into the playoff conversation. So even an early season loss like this, I mean, that's one of the faults of our system in college football, of a ranking system that moves you up or down based on last week's results or based on the most recent week's results, is it's almost better to have a loss early in the season because then you give yourself an opportunity to climb back up, as opposed to if you're right on the cusp late in the season and you lose, it really kind of, you don't have an opportunity to climb back into that top 8, top 5, top 4 conversation. And so even a loss in this game doesn't necessarily completely eliminate Pitt from the national picture, the national scene. Now, they would need a lot of help as opposed to being in a position to control their own destiny as we talk about those big goals. But the reality is that both sides are right. I mean, both sides of this are true, that this game is absolutely crucial to working toward those big goals, but it also doesn't have any real consequence on some other pretty big goals and aspirations that, look, if they were to lose this game but go out and repeat as ACC champs, I think this would be viewed as a very successful season. If they lose this game in Miami and they finish the year 10-2, it's a very successful season, even if they don't make it back to the ACC championship game. So there's a lot riding on this game, and there's not. Or maybe a better way to say it is there's a lot riding on this game, but there are also a lot of opportunities to accomplish a lot of goals if this game doesn't go the way you want it to go. Now, how does this game look for Pitt? How do the matchups look? What are the things you need to watch for when Pitt takes on Tennessee on Saturday at Acrisure Stadium, that 3:30 kickoff? We're going to bring in our friend Tyler Mansfield from Vol.com to tell us about Tennessee, tell us about Hendon Hooker, Josh Heupel, and why Tennessee's defense, despite Ball State's quarterback dropping back more than 40 times, didn't record a single sack. Let's ask Tyler Mansfield from Vol.com what was going on in that situation and a lot more about the Tennessee Volunteers. And Tyler, thanks so much for joining us. Really excited to preview Tennessee here today. It's interesting because Pitt, Pat Narduzzi and the Pitt coaches and players have kind of talked all week that, sure, they're playing Tennessee for the second year in a row, but they feel like this is kind of the fourth year of playing Tennessee, having faced UCF with Josh Heupel as the quarterback, or as the head coach, when Pitt played against UCF in 2018 and 2019. I'm curious, though. I feel like it's always tough to figure out after that first game. Tennessee plays Ball State. They blow them out 59-10. It's not quite like FSU, LSU playing each other, Notre Dame, Ohio State. And, when you don't play a Power 5 conference opponent in that first game, it can be tough to sort of figure out what's real and what's not. So give me a sense out of that blowout win. What do you think? Maybe something on each side of the ball that was real that you look at and say, yeah, that's who this Tennessee team really is. And maybe something on each side of the ball that you say, well, we're TBD on that. We're still trying to figure out where they are in those areas.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, when you play a non-Power 5 opponent and you are Power 5 in your first game, you can't really judge. I mean, you can, but it's 59-10. What do you take from that game? I mean, obviously, you'll find the worst things first, because if you win by that much, you have to see what went wrong. I think from that perspective, the offensive line did their job of protecting Hendon Hooker. He had a strong game, 4 touchdowns in one half. Didn't play the fourth quarter, only played, I think, the first drive of the third. Got to put Joe Milton in, who's obviously a good backup quarterback. He started Tennessee before. I think last year when Pitt played them, it was Hooker who was the backup, and then Milton started. Obviously, he didn't play the best, got a little injury going, and that's when Hooker said, all right, I'm the guy. And then from there, it's been him. Now, the run game, they defending the run, they were good at. I think there's some key things there on third downs they kind of missed up on. But, Ball State, it's an inexperienced quarterback, and they put up 10 points. They couldn't move the ball. But Tennessee, there's things they did well and things they did bad. The good thing, like I said, was Hooker. Got a lot of wide receivers involved because that's that first game. You're able to empty the bench, play a lot of different people, which is great. The running back room, a true freshman scored a touchdown in his first game at Tennessee. So takeaways from that game is, Hooker's good. The offense is going to be rolling under Josh Heupel. I think since it's year 2, 1 year under their belt with playing under him and his system, and the OC Alex Golish, I think they've learned a lot, and I think they gel together real well. Defensively, they can be better. I think, we'll talk about it here soon, I'm sure. Pitt's front seven scares Tennessee, I think, in a way. I think they know that how good Pitt is up front. So we'll see how that matchup goes. But the Ball State game's in the books. I think the main thing is they started hot and they took a big lead in the halftime, 38-0, and won by 49. I think that's the main thing they're happy about because last year, the Bowling Green State game, they didn't play very well in the first half, didn't score second quarter, so I think that's much better.
Yeah, no doubt. I mentioned earlier about how Pitt has familiarity with Josh Heupel. Hendon Hooker has familiarity with Pitt. This will be his fourth game playing against Pitt. I think he was a starter in the first two when he was at Virginia Tech last year. He came in, and I think the consensus from Pitt fans after the game last year is if Hooker had started, the outcome might have been different in Tennessee's favor. Has there been any talk this week in Knoxville, either from Heupel or Hooker himself, about familiarity with Pitt and how that might be an advantage for Hendon Hooker going into this game?
Yeah, Heupel touched on it a few times this week. I think Narduzzi actually said, Hendon Hooker, he played him 12 years in a row. He's been there forever. But obviously, Virginia Tech, Tennessee, last year they saw him in the second half. Well, whenever he came in that game and still played pretty well. Heupel said, this Pitt team, it's the same makeup, but they do some things differently offensively. Obviously, no Kenny Pickett, no Jordan Addison. The defense has some different fundamental things they've done differently this year through that first game against West Virginia. But speaking of Hendon Hooker in the situation is, I think it helps Pitt prepare for him better. And Heupel said, every year is different. Coach speak. It's a different game, it's a different team, but I think they know how to plan for him. So I think Heupel and Co are trying to plan different things to do differently because if you don't, then Narduzzi and his staff will know how to defend him well. He's great at running. He loves to run. He's a dual threat quarterback, but honestly, he finds people in space and it hits them through large strides. So I think that's been the main thing. Is I think they're trying to have a few new things they do offensively with him because Pitt's defense knows how he plays.
You mentioned about running, and I'd kind of forgotten. I was looking back at last year's game that Joe Milton and Hendon Hooker had like 103 rushing yards combined. I think probably more, if not for sack yardage being taken off the rushing total. Is the quarterback run a part of this offense? Is this something they're going to use? It doesn't look like they did a whole lot of it. Maybe 2 carries between those two guys combined against Ball State. But is that something you would expect to see out of Heupel's offense, having Hooker, quarterback run as part of the offensive game plan?
I think it might emerge, eventually. I don't think it's a key thing right now. But, obviously, if Hooker takes a snap and he sees distance, he's going to run with it if there's nobody open. And he did that against Ball State a couple times, 4 total touchdowns, 2 through the air, 2 on the ground. And, I think he did well running the ball. There's no numbers to show. I think it shows like 2 carries, 12 yards, 2 touchdowns, which that's not right. Obviously, you get tackled or sacked in the backfield, it's differently. But I think he might start running more. He can run. But I'm not sure if it'll be designs, by Josh Heupel. I think they want to move the ball quick. Obviously, they snap the ball very fast. I think Narduzzi said, they snap it, 7, 12 seconds, just like that over and over and over. So that's hard to defend in itself. So I think there might be plays where, say, they take a snap and Hooker's he's not ready, but I think no one's ready to catch the ball yet. He takes off running, and no one can prepare for that because he's fast. He can, if it's a 2-yard run, he can get that pretty easy. So I don't think it's by design. I just think it's by what he thinks he can do. For each play.
We know how dangerous that passing game is, and that's really the heart of it there for Tennessee's offense. But I'm curious about the regular running game. I was looking at Jalen Wright and Jabari Small, 26 carries combined, 151 yards, 2 touchdowns. Pitt had some trouble stopping the run against West Virginia on Thursday night, which is kind of uncharacteristic. Pitt has usually been pretty good at run defense. What do you see out of Wright and Small? Is this still going to be a pass heavy offense once they get into tougher competition like Power 5 teams, or what do you expect to see out of the run game from Tennessee?
That's a good point. I think the run game just through week 1, I think they know they have more than one option now. Jabari Small is number 1 guy. He's the starter. He'll get the first carry of the game and a majority of them. But Jalen Wright's a guy I think he's strong. I think Small's a little bit the more quicker back, and Wright's a little bit the stronger back. And also the Dylan Sampson kid, he's a true freshman. His first game, obviously it's Ball State, you're up 30, but he broke off for a nice run, scored a touchdown pass. So I think coming into the year, they're like, well, we have 2 backs, we need more than that. Who's going to carry the load? But I think there's a good balance. Look at the stats from week 1. I think Small and Wright were similar in yardage, each scored a touchdown, and so did Dylan Sampson. So I think there's 3 guys there that, teams have to prepare for now, because who knows if Small get the first 2-3 carries and then Wright gets 10 straight, or if Sampson hops in on a 3rd down run and tries to pick up yardage on, for the true freshman. So I think they still are, a passing attack offense, but I think they developed the run pretty well over the offseason and through week 1. that I think we'll see some run game, so some run plays too on top of the passing.
And one last thing on the offense, I wanted to ask you about. I mean, just those weapons in the passing game. What is Hendon Hooker working with this year? How much have they brought back from last season? Who's really kind of leading the charge in the receiver room?
Yeah, so Cedric Tillman's number one guy. I mean, he is a really, really, really good wide receiver there. Along with him, Jalen Hyatt's a guy who stepped up, through week one. He had some good catches. I think he may have scored a touchdown pass there. Jimmy Holiday is a veteran who didn't really get his feet wet at Tennessee yet. I think he played last year some and showed what he can do. But this year, week one, I think he was a second leading receiver. I think Hooker found him in strides, multiple times. So did Joe Milton. And on top of them, obviously, USC transfer Brew McCoy. He's a guy that Heupel's really, really big on. College football knows who he is. I mean, he was a big rated athlete coming out of California, went to USC. I think 1 year there, this happened. 1 year there, this happened. And obviously in the portal, Tennessee picked him up, took a chance on him. Now he's back at he's Tennessee. His first game, his feet are wet now. He caught some passes. I think he finished with 42 yards. It was. And Heupel said he's happy with what he saw out of him. He feels when he had the ball in his hands, he did great things. So I think he's got to keep watching as the season progresses.
McCoy, there were questions about eligibility, right? Didn't it take late into the summer before he was ruled eligible? Was he practicing that whole time though? I mean, did he have a full training camp with the team?
I'm pretty sure he was practicing all year long. I could be wrong that, like I said, I'm new to the beat, but I know he was not eligible until I think it may have been like Monday or Tuesday of game week.
Right.
If not that, it was the weekend before, but it was like a short distance there. You know how players are. I'm sure he was working out. He knew the playbook, studying his things. Because, I mean, on the field, he looked like he had been there for a couple of years. I mean, he didn't, put up crazy yardage, but he knew where to run in space. He knew what his routes were. I think he was in there, quite a bit. He's still listed as a or starter. So not a key starter yet, but he played pretty well for that first game.
Yeah, if he knows what he's doing, that's scary for the SEC. that's gonna be a problem because he's pretty good. On the defensive side, I think the one thing that's remarkable to look at, it's a 59-10 game. Ball State's quarterback drops back more than 40 times, and Tennessee doesn't have any sacks. Were they close and just missing? Was he getting rid of the ball real quickly? I didn't watch that game, so I can't. Pitt had their own game that night. I was a little bit occupied. How do you account for that lack of sacks there?
That's something I've wrote about a couple of times this week. I didn't really notice it, until after the game. I'm back looking at stats. I'm like, John Paddock wasn't sacked one time. It was an inexperienced quarterback at Ball State. Playing one of his first games for them. And, the guy has a lot to learn. He's a, new quarterback in a new system. That team's a work in progress, but not one single sack on a non-Power 5, a MAC team. And, you look at it like, well, we won by 49, what's the big deal? But I think Heupel and Tim Banks, the DC, understand that can't happen every week. You're playing Pitt. Slovis got sacked 5 times last week. I mean, whatever, if it's his fault or the O-line's fault, whoever it was, I think it's the majority or both there. But they have to sack the quarterback. I mean, if it's one a game, they put 3 up on a game. They know they got to be better in that category. I'm not really sure what exactly happened, but now I watched some game film, and Paddock, I mean, he stood there for a long time in spots, and he still wouldn't convert a pass or pick up many yards on the ground, but they didn't sack him one time. And I just don't know how that happens in one single game, but I know it's an emphasis they've been working on this week. They can't let it happen again, especially going to Pitt on the road. You got to get Slovis, at least once. So we'll see if that improves this week for sure.
Yeah, I have a feeling if they don't get to Slovis, this might be like a 55-54 game, and we'll be there for 5.5 hours. These teams will be throwing the ball all over the place, and there'll be a lot of points scored. Anything else with the defense? I mean, that's the stat that really stands out. It's going to be hard to take a lot else from, again, a 59-10 blowout win. But is there any other sort of vulnerabilities or concerns about this Tennessee defense heading into a game against a Power 5 opponent?
Off the top of my head, I think the main thing is that the unit's really good. I mean, it's a veteran-led unit. The line is just pretty solid. The cornerbacks are pretty solid. There's some players that have been there for a few years now. Obviously, it's still second year in Josh Heupel's system, but his offensive guy, Tim Banks, is a DC coach who his guys buy into the system. They like what they're doing, and I think they're physical. It's a tough unit. They're an SEC team. Narduzzi said it best. This is SEC boys coming here. I mean, they know how to play. I think their hands are full with Pitt's offense still. I mean, it's not Kenny Pickett anymore. Slovis is new to that system, but this is a guy who played at USC for years. He can move the ball pretty well. Um, I forgot his name off my head, but Pitt's running back, his numbers for week one are really good. I think only a sophomore. His
Yeah.
first year is really good. In his first game, it's been really good. I think the defending the run will be big this week too. Not only trying to sack or get to Slovis, but also the running back there. I think it's a good defensive unit. It's just that, like you said, that first week you can't really test them because it's Ball State. We saw what they did good and what things they can work on. We just got to see how that compares to a Power 5 team this week.
All right, Tyler, thanks so much for your time and great insight and great information on Tennessee. Really enjoyed it and looking forward to the game on Saturday. We'll see you at Acrisure Stadium.
Appreciate it, Chris. Thanks for having me.
And thanks so much to Tyler Mansfield from VolReport.com for joining us here on the Morning Pit. Great insight from Tyler. He actually just started with Vol Report on September 1st. His first day at the site was the day of the game. But he's got a lot of history. He knows about the program. He knows what's going on with the team. I think he had a lot of great insight for us. And it is interesting because, Pat Narduzzi and the Pitt players and coaches have talked about how they feel like they played Josh Heupel 4 times in the last, 5 seasons, right? 2018, 19 at UCF. Didn't play him in 2020, but they played him last year at Tennessee. So it's 3 times in the last 4 seasons. This will be 4 times in the last 5 seasons. They've also played Hendon Hooker 3 times in the last 3 seasons. Hooker at Virginia Tech in 2019, that ugly 28-0 game down in Blacksburg. Hooker was 10 of 13 for 153 and 2 touchdowns. Pitt played just the only thing more miserable than the rain that was falling that day was Pitt's performance. The next year, Virginia Tech comes to Heinz Field. I think when we're talking about in the past, when we're talking about games that happened in the past, we would say the games were at Heinz Field. Like, we wouldn't say that Pitt played Virginia Tech at Acrisure Stadium in 2020, would we? Either way, that game during the COVID year, if you recall, Pitt had like 9 guys out due to COVID. A bunch of the offensive linemen, Jordan Addison didn't play. It looked like it was going to be a bloodbath. There were Pitt coaches telling me before the game, why are we even playing this game? Why hasn't this game gotten postponed? Why isn't the ACC moving this game? We can't field, what we feel. We can't put out on the field what we feel is a roster. We're not comfortable with the roster that we're able to put out there today. And then they go out and just crush Virginia Tech, just absolutely obliterated them. Hendon Hooker in that game, 13 of 22 for 260, 2 touchdowns and 1 pick. And then last year, of course, Pitt goes down to Tennessee. Joe Milton is the starting quarterback. He was pretty bad. I guess got hurt at a certain point. Really missed a lot of open wide receivers. Could have changed the course of the game if he hit some of those passes. Milton gets pulled. Hendon Hooker comes in, 15 of 21, $188, 2 touchdowns and a pick. But Tennessee ultimately takes the loss. So, in these 3 games where Hooker played against Pitt, Pitt is 2-1 in those 3 games, having won the last 2. Although, again, you put a little asterisk on last year's game because Hooker didn't start, and maybe the outcome would have been different if he had. But in those 3 games, Hendon Hooker, 38 of 56, 601 yards, 6 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Not a bad stat line, really. Limited pass opportunities in that 2019 game. He went 10 of 13 because they really didn't need to throw because Pitt was just so bad that day. I think when we think back, we probably don't try not to think about that 2019 season very often from a Pitt perspective. They had some real dogs that year. And I don't mean like their players, man. They had dogs out there on the field. They put in some dog performances that year. Virginia Tech was certainly one of them. Miami and Boston College would rank pretty high on that scale as well. But that was the only year that Hooker has been part of a win over Pitt. Although I guess he probably was on Virginia Tech's roster in 2017 as a redshirting freshman, kind of like Kenny Pickett. Pickett played that year, but they were both true freshmen at the same time. They were both in the same recruiting class, actually. Pitt tried to recruit both guys. I don't want to say that they missed on Hooker, so they turned to Pickett, but Hooker was one of their priority quarterbacks. There were like 3 guys that were really after in that class. Pickett is obviously the guy they got, and that worked out pretty well for him. But, Hendon Hooker has been on the field for 3 games against Pitt, and he's 1-2 in those 3 games, having lost the last 2. But again, with that asterisk on last year, it's gonna be a challenge. Hendon Hooker, I think he's gonna put up his yards. He had a big game against Ball State, which he should. But he's gonna put up yards. I think he's gonna throw, and they're gonna hit some of those big plays. The biggest question, which I talked about yesterday, which I'm going to write about in the 3-2-1 column tomorrow. And it's going to be something I keep talking about until we get an answer. I forget who I said this to. We're not going to have an answer to this question until we have an answer. But can Pitt win in that kind of a shootout environment? Now, I think they'll be able to get after Hendon Hooker a little bit while running the risk of losing contain, and he takes off and runs for a pickup. But he's gonna attack downfield, and they're probably gonna hit some of those shots, which is gonna put the pressure back on Pitt's offense to try and answer those scores and win in a shootout kind of environment. Now, you heard me ask Tyler about the sort of remarkable stat that Ball State's quarterback, I think, dropped back 44 times, and Virginia Tech didn't get a single sack. Tennessee didn't get a single sack in that game. Now, Dave Borbley spoke highly of the defensive line that Tennessee has, but no sacks? It's very curious. If they're just as ineffective with the pass rush on Saturday as they were last Thursday when they played Ball State, Pitt might be able to win a shootout. If they can't get to Kedon Slovis and put pressure on Kedon Slovis, I'm pretty sure he can make the throws. If there's really no pressure, if it's like this Ball State game where Tennessee isn't able to get to the quarterback one time on 44 dropbacks, I think Kedon Slovis is going to get his. And Pitt's receivers are going to make some plays if he's got that kind of time. Now, the receivers, we talked a lot about this yesterday, the receivers have to get to their spots, they have to run their right routes, they have to have the right departure angles and all those different things. But if they can't get pressure on Slovis, I think it's going to be a problem. We'll see what the running game's able to do. We got Rodney Hammond on the screen just there. It just flipped over. Probably not going to play, is my guess. Izzy Abanikanda, who I've been trumpeting all offseason, only to see him kind of lay an egg, at least in terms of the rushing game on Thursday night. Although obviously he had a huge play as a pass catcher for the game-tying touchdown there. It's going to fall on him to carry the load, and he's going to have to be much better than he was in the backyard brawl. But we'll have plenty of time tomorrow to do some final thoughts, some final matchup breakdowns of this game heading into Saturday. But like I said from the top, it's a huge game. And you want to be in this kind of game. You want to be in a kind of game where you say, we've got big expectations for this team. This team has some big goals. This team has, realistic shot at achieving at a pretty high level. But they're going to have to win some big-time games to pull it off. Last year's team had to win some big-time games to pull it off. They had to beat Clemson to pull it off. They had to win the ACC championship game in the biggest stage to pull it off. They had to beat Virginia. And say what you want about Virginia, but that was a big stage in a big setting with a whole lot on the line, and they had to win that game, and they stepped up. They answered the call when they needed to answer the call to accomplish their goals. This is this year's team's first chance at that kind of opportunity. Because last year's team, when they went to Tennessee last year, they weren't thinking about, wow, what do we need to do to be in the college football playoff conversation? This team is legitimately thinking that, and I think for a good reason, because they very well might be in that conversation. But if they want to be in that conversation, you got to win games like this. Took care of business last week, great start. Now you got to follow it up. And we won't even get into, how you need to not blow it the following week if you actually do come out with a win this Saturday. So we'll get to that when it's time to get to that. For now, the focus is on Tennessee, the focus is on the Volunteers, and the focus is on a huge game at Acrisure Stadium, 3:30 kickoff Saturday afternoon. Game televised on ABC, but I think the weather looks good. Changes every day, but should be a really nice day on the North Shore. So hopefully you're able to make it. We got one more Morning Pitt between now and then. Of course, we have tomorrow morning, Friday morning, we'll have a new episode out. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, to make sure you never miss an episode of the Morning Pit, to make sure you never miss our live show, the live Panther-Lair show on Wednesday nights, and to make sure you never miss our live post-game show that we'll do after the games. We do a lot of stuff at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You don't want to miss any of it. Hit that subscribe button, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and like this video too. That helps us spread the word about what we're trying to do here and increase the engagement and increase the reach, which is always fun to do. Stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com for all the pregame content to get you ready for Saturday's game. We've got a lot. We got film breakdowns, we got interviews, we got analysis, we got all kinds of stuff at Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you go there. And of course, message boards where you can talk to other Pitt fans throughout the week about what this game is going to look like, and then the ever infamous game thread in the middle of the game where no one ever says anything that they later regret or are proven wrong about. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Thanks so much for tuning in to us this morning. We appreciate it. Have a great rest of the day, and we will see you tomorrow morning here with the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.